Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Let me check my volume before I plow into this. Guys, if you enjoy the content, please hit the button so you can see the notifications. I try to send it out on Twitter when I can remember to do so. Everyone always tells me to do it. I often forget. But please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. I do live videos all the time. So today should have been a momentous day for Brits. They were going out in order to get their voting done. And again, like I said earlier, I love election day. I love the smell in the air when people go out and they're voting. That democracy in action. I'm placing this vote and I'm pulling this lever. I'm pushing this button. And that's the guy who I wanted in that particular office for representative governments. Snag in this year's British election. Theresa May's government has rolled out a voter ID scheme. You don't say. Now, I've said that Brits are a shade away from the American government, and finally, it's arrived in Britain. Voter ID. Oh, isn't it great when you other somebody in your populace? Here's the thing. Is there really a voter ID issue or voter fraud issue in Britain? No, there's not. Just like there's not one in the United States. And what I would recommend to you, Brits, is to stop taking your government seriously. You see, you don't have this thing that we have in this country. The cynicism in regards to the political class, that they're willing to do things and act in particular ways and give certain pretexts and do the opposite under that pretext. Voter ID is one of those schemes. Do you realize for the first time in history, Brits have not been able to place their vote in the polls? Many of them are pissed off. First time in history under the Theresa May government, rolled out just before the election, or at the very least rolled out for this election. Scam. It's called rigging the process. That's exactly what it's called. Stop taking Theresa May being serious on this. Here's the truth point. Regardless of what they're telling you, they're looking at their darker cousin in America. And I keep saying Britain is becoming America. Welcome to America. They're looking at their darker cousin in America for the nasty shit that they dredged up from the standpoint of politics in order to keep conservatives in office, especially when no conservatives are dramatically unpopular. If an election was held today between Theresa May and Corbyn, she would lose. She would get her bags and go packing. Her bags would be packed and she would lose. Downing Street would no longer be her address. Just to make my point clear, there's a Republican named Paul Weyrich. I always remember this video because when Republicans tell me about this voter nonsense, I realize that it's pretext. You get a pretext and you use that pretext in order to do something that you want. Because if you told the American public, or if you told any public what you actually wanted to do, they will recoil at what you're telling them. We have a problem. We have a lot of people who are going to go to the polls that don't like us. But we want to stay in office because we're working at the behest of somebody else. But the person who we're working at the behest of is not necessarily on the fave with the public itself. How on earth do we stay in office when people hate our guts and they don't like our policies and we failed across the board? How do we stay in office under these circumstances? This is Paul Weyrich's explanation of voting. And he's right, by the way. It's sick, but he's right.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
There was no context missing in that. What he's saying is literally true. That the voting power of the conservatives tend to go up as the voting is essentially the number of people who vote goes down. So the strategy in this wasn't necessarily to change the policies itself to make them more appealable. I think that's the word. Amenable to what the public wants. It was to lower the people who are voting. I hate to tell you Britain, I hate to tell you Brits, but it sounds like that Theresa May's government has decided that the same policy needs to be enacted in Britain in order to keep her and her cronies and those other conservatives and Tories in power. You should be pissed off. And apparently there's a lot of Brits that are pissed off. This is The Independent. Shout out Ah, damn it, I'm sorry. There's a gentleman on Facebook who responded and pushed this up, and I'm sorry, dude, I can't remember your name. I'm sorry. So this is independent British voters furious after being denied right to vote for the first time in history over controversial ID scheme. And I love the fact they call it a scheme, because that's exactly what it is. It's a scheme. It's a voter ID scheme. The whole point of it is to lower the number of people who are going to vote to make it more likely, or at the very least, the better the odds for a Tory to get in. Whatever that percentage is, let's say that percentage is 5%. That may be enough of a fudge factor to either get a Tory in that seat or fudge it enough to keep a Tory in that seat. You're being scammed. You're being scammed. Theresa May's government is scamming you with regards to this voting stuff. This is voter fraud. The voter fraud is not necessarily in trying to prevent immigrants from voting. The voter fraud is trying to fudge it enough to keep Tories in power. Having to vote is a basic right, human right in democracy. This is supposed to be a democracy. Welcome to the Tories. People have been denied the right to vote in a local election for the first time in history due to a controversial new ballot check that forces voters to prove their identities before casting the ballot. A 76-year-old man who lives in Bromley for 40 years told The Independent he was shocked to be turned away because he did not have the bank card or a passport. This is a nonsense scheme, Peter White added. Gosport, Swindon, Watford, and Woking are all running the ballot schemes which have raised fears that people will be wrongly disenfranchised. And they are. Do you realize hundreds of thousands of people in the United States get disenfranchised from being able to vote? Do you realize that George Bush was able to stay in office because they were able to shed off, or even get elected in the first place in Florida, because they were able to shed off thousands or hundreds of thousands of African Americans for the voter rolls in Florida? Wisconsin, even in this election, Donald Trump, you can make an argument, was able to get in office because they were able to shave off just enough to get him in that seat in multiple states throughout the United States. In the United States, voter fraud was like point something percent. And yet, the number of people that are kept off the voter rolls was in the percents. Percents enough, depending upon the state that you were in, to either get somebody in office or keep somebody in office. I'm making the point that it's probably going to work the same way in Britain. So, I'm angry because I don't believe in carrying ID. Having to vote is a basic human right in democracy, and this is supposed to be a democracy, the 72-year-old added. I'm choosing not to vote, and have never done that before. I think people who have problems with their IDs will certainly be disenfranchised, even if they've lived here for years. And that's true, by the way. That's a flat fact true. It's easy. It's foreseeable. That's the whole point of the voter ID laws. As we know, for the last week or two, there have been a lot of people out there who are in that situation. It means I have to make a stand from the point of view, too, because I know that they will be either disenfranchised or will not be happy to come down and vote. Demanding a rethink of the policy in March, a group of 40 charities and academies said Electoral Commission figures show there were only 28 allegations of impersonations out of almost 45 million votes in 2017 and one conviction. Let me repeat that. There have only been 28 allegations of impersonations out of 45 million votes and only one conviction. This is nonsense. That's the point that I'm getting at. This is nonsense. Your government is lying to you. Your government is doing things because your government want Tories to stay in power. This is them gaming and rigging the system. I am trying to be as clear as day. This is what they do in the United States, and they are bringing it as a pallet to Britain. Brits, don't allow it. Don't allow it. They are rigging your system. They are cheating your system. They do this here in the United States. They're going to do it there. Do you realize 28 allegations out of 45 million? And the idea that Theresa May looks at this and says, yeah, we need to secure our elections because we have 45 out of 28 out of 45 million votes, 28 allegations out of 45 million votes and one conviction. We need to secure our elections because that one person, oh man, that one guy. Think of how many people you're fudging off the rolls when they do this. Part of the reason they do this is because there are some people who say, well, I mean, I don't want people voting in those places. I don't want immigrants coming in and taking those votes. Some of those people are well-meaning, useful idiots, but they're still useful idiots nonetheless. That stat is damning, and it eats alive any notion that Theresa May or whatever Tory government is trying to use to make this case. There is no case for this. The reality of this, that this is a pretext for Tories to try to game the system to stay in power. Let's keep going. That number by itself, anybody who's sitting in a meeting and you hear that there's been one conviction, 28 out of 45 million. 28 out of 45 million. And I guarantee you that it's going to keep out a lot of Brits from being able to vote more than that one person that got convicted. In the United States, the numbers were ridiculous. If I am animated about this, I'm animated about this from the standpoint that this takes place here. Do you know we've had officials, one guy, I think it was in New Jersey, I can't think of his name. This was years ago, during Obama versus Romney. And he comes out and he lets the cat out of the bag. Voter ID in this state is going to allow Mitt Romney to win this state for the first time in 20 years. And he's like, wait, did you just say voter ID was going to help Mitt Romney win the state? Yes, that's exactly what he said. Voter ID was going to help Mitt Romney win the state. This is political gamesmanship. Don't take them seriously. Do not take this government seriously when they're talking about this. That number by itself looks like you would stop and say, what? We're doing all this for one? Decades of international studies show that restrictive identification requirements are particularly disadvantageous to certain voter groups who are less likely to possess approved ID for various socioeconomic and accessible reasons, said the letter to the government. Voter ID reforms could therefore affect young people, older people, disabled people, transgender people, gender non-conforming people, BAME communities, and the homeless. People who don't vote Tories. Is it just so happen that the people who are disaffected by this just so happen don't vote Tories? And it's just so happened that that's supposedly a coincidence, that the people who are most adversely affected by this just so happen don't vote Tories. It's not a coincidence. It's intentional. It's completely intentional. This is exactly what they're doing in the States. They're bringing it to Britain. That's all I'm saying. I know I've said it a few times. I'm hyped up. If I'm hyped up about this, it's because they're doing it here, and I don't want them to take that shit over to Britain. That's all. I call you our darker brother. As I say, we're your darker brother, and this is kind of what I mean. This is exactly what I mean. I'm not going to keep this one long because I want people to be able to see it, and I want it to be accessible. Who's here? Somebody's here. Hello, jerk. All right, I've got a day to get to. I'm sure I'll see you some later. Peace. Yes. It's a paradox. Peace, jerk. Okay. People are just dicking around on the chat. So I will leave this here. Brits, get those people out of office. That's all I'm saying. They're trying to screw you over, and they're lying to you in the process of trying to screw you over. The only voter fraud here is what the Theresa May government or the Tory government is trying to do with the electoral process in Britain. They're trying to make you little America. Don't let them. So I ended at that. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks, everyone.